Africans, Congo's President Felix Tshisekedi and his Rwandan counterpart in Paul Kagame have also agreed to attend an online meeting tomorrow, we understand, in Kenya. They were invited by William Ruto, who you've just heard from there, to discuss the escalating situation in the conflict in the eastern part of the DRC, near the border with Rwanda. Meanwhile, Rwanda and the DRC, as well as Kenya, of course, are members of the East African community. All of this also coming against the backdrop of President Cyril Ramaphosa and Kagame agreeing that a ceasefire and peace negotiations must begin. In South Africa, meanwhile, families of those who've been killed in the conflict are beginning to describe the extent of their loss. Let's speak about all of this with our next guest, Professor of Sociology at Stellenbosch University. That's Lindy Heinecken, who joins us now via our video link. Prof, it's lovely to see you. Thanks very much indeed for making time to speak to us.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Absolutely. It's a story that's now sort of garnered the attention of the international community. The UN Security Council holding an emergency meeting at the weekend, and we're hearing these different regional bodies also starting to have talks. One has to wonder what you reckon the solution looks like. Is the end of this war does it need a political solution where discussions need to happen, or do you reckon the solution is actually going to be more military-based?
I think it's going to be a mixture of both, and the reasons, therefore, is because this is a very multi-layered debate issue. There are many different role players at stake here, so yes, definitely there needs to be the political will to reach a peace settlement because it affects all the neighboring countries as well. So that definitely is your first port of call. But there needs to be some kind of military presence also to stabilize the situation. So I think it's going to be a balance between the two.
Who is best placed to lead those talks, do you think?
Well, that is a very difficult question to answer. I mean, the relationship between, so let me start off by saying that South Africa is a regional hegemon and a key economic and military player. So it is well placed to facilitate this. But the relationship between Kagame and Ramaphosa is not the best of relationship. So it's going to have to be somebody that engenders trust. So, I mean, in terms of who best to broker this, perhaps somebody that has got the credibility. It may involve somebody from the UN as well, that understands the dynamics of the conflict is probably the best bet.
This is not the first time, of course, the M23 rebels have kind of moved into the city of Goma. It's happened again, I think it was 2012, 2013. At the time, it seemed it was players like the US who were able to call for cool heads in some ways. And, you know, one has to wonder whether or not Washington, with Trump at the helm, would be able to play a similar kind of role this time around.
Well, that again is a very difficult question to answer, right? And I do think that Africa should take the lead in terms of resolving these type of African conflicts. But sometimes it is good to have a kind of an independent person, a mediator from the outside that understands the conflict and has got a good overview of this to play that kind of mediation role at this point in time.
Right. There's this ongoing debate about what the SANDF should do next. And I suppose on the one hand, there's concerns about the role that South Africa ought to be playing. You describe the country as a hegemonic player in the region. But on the other, there's real concerns about the SANDF's capacity. We've reported for years now about the budgetary cuts and the extent to which all of that has affected, frankly, the soldiers' ability to stay alive and push back against the M23. I'm not quite sure what one should do. And I wonder if your kind of work has given you any kind of insights about what the best solution is, not only for the country, but for the region.
Yeah, this is a very opportune moment to discuss this, because for years, really, the South African Defence Force has, as we know, been structured as a conventional force, and it's been performing these secondary roles like peacekeeping, like domestic roles in a collateral facility. So in other words, it is not structured, funded, or specifically trained for these type of operations. So that's one. There's going to have to be a serious refocus in terms of the budgetary constraints that we have in terms of the roles that the Defence Force is meant to play and what shape and structure the Defence Force should take. That's number one. So number two is to look at specifically what we can do within the capacity that we have, because the Defence Force is overstretched at present. It is underfunded. And by that, I'm not saying that it is not properly trained for peacekeeping operations. There's been some critique that the SANDF is not properly trained. But in effect, it is extensive experience in peacekeeping. There's nothing wrong with the peacekeeping training, but they do not have the necessary logistical support, intelligence support, medical support, air protection, air cover to perform these missions effectively. So in other words, they can be deployed for these missions, but for them to be employed effectively, they need the support.
Yeah. So what happens in the interim, right? Whilst that conversation takes place, do you pull out and risk coming across as, I don't know, admitting defeat?
Yeah, this is now a very difficult situation that the SANDF finds itself in, because first of all, I need to brief the listeners on my conversation that I've had with a general in part of a project that I'm doing called The Responsibility to Protect. And that is the challenges that peacekeepers face. So one of the situations they find themselves in is the location of the base that they are presently in, because the M23 rebels actually attacked their base. Now the base has been established years ago as a peacekeeping base. In other words, it must be visible to those from the outside what the peacekeepers are and what they are doing. It's located in a valley, so the rebels have got the high ground. So that makes them particularly vulnerable in terms of their current location. Now the challenge here is not only the vulnerability of their location, but the roads and access to their base has been blocked off. So how the SANDF is going to get the necessary support is our first question. Withdrawal is definitely going to be a diplomatic and military setback, and will be seen as an achievement by the M23 rebels. So reinforcement is definitely currently needed, but the SANDF in itself has not got the airlift or capability to actually intervene by itself. It will need outside assistance to aid them in this regard.
Yeah, I mean, you speak about, forces heading back to their base. I'm no soldier. I've never been in a warlike situation, but I can't imagine it's easy fighting from your base, because that means your ability to maneuver has been seriously compromised, which already in and of itself will be a bit of a setback.
Yes, absolutely. So what has happened here is that instead of them being in an offensive position where they are repelling the enemy, they are now in a defensive situation where they have to defend themselves within the base.
Sure. Difficult situation indeed. We're told Felix Tshisekedi, the president of the DRC, may very well address his country today. I'm not quite sure what one says in the situation, and I suppose it's worth getting your thoughts on this. There are so many different moving parts, including, of course, the interest that Rwanda has, allegations that they've denied that they're sponsoring M23 rebels, the role that the region can play, and the United Nations. If you had the president's ear, how would you reckon he approaches today's address?
Oh, again, you're asking me very taxing questions today. But I think one of the key issues here is the problems that he has created for himself. And the one is that the FADC's, the National Defence Force's credibility, and this bringing in the reserve force, these patriots as they call them, has affected the legitimacy of their military. So it is really important here to speak to the nation in terms of what plans are going forward to stabilize the situation. They've asked MONUSCO to leave. They asked the East African force to leave. Now they are going to probably ask the SADC contingent to leave as well, because they see them as ineffective. So how is he going to speak to his nation now? And really the primary message that he needs to get across is how is he going to provide security and stability within that region? That is going to be the key issue, because it's a huge humanitarian crisis. Since 2021, 7 million civilians have fled. The past couple of weeks, 400,000 have fled. So the message immediately is how to create security and stability to protect the citizens of his country. That would be number one. Number two is to put in place diplomatic talks and some kind of ceasefire agreements. But as we know, these ceasefire agreements have not held water over the years. So it is really complex because it involves so many different actors. There's over 100 rebel groups involved in this conflict in the eastern DRC. So it's not only M23, it's all these other rebel groups. It's all the other countries which have also got their finger in the pie here that need to be brought to the table. But it's very clear that that this needs to be addressed, because we really are facing a potential war which can destabilize the entire region.
Yeah, absolutely. We're yet to speak about the psychological toll this has had on people in the DRC who in many ways have had to bear the brunt of the conflict that's taken place over the past couple of years. Professor Heinecken, lovely speaking to you. Thank you for tackling these tough questions. It's a tough situation indeed, even in the DRC, and certainly a test for the leaders of the day. Professor Lindy Heinecken is a professor of sociology with Stellenbosch University.